Cool. So before we begin, I'd just like to pay my respects to the traditional owners of the land on which we gather today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'd also like to pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. So good afternoon, everyone. I hope we all know what talk we're in at. It's the AI/ML and Evolving Landscapes of Content Creation. So looks like we're all in the right place. So my name's Nicola. I am a startup solutions architect with AWS. So in my role, I get to work day to day designing and building with startups. At AWS, we're really committed to helping customers and game studios build, run and grow their games on AWS. And that's part of the reason why we partner with people like companies like Vercel for front-end hosting, and Leonardo AI, who joins me here today for the talk. So I'm really excited to be joined by Jachin Bhasme, who's the Chief Operating Officer. So we had a bit of a talk about making sure I got that pronunciation right. Chief Operating Officer at Leonardo AI. So for those who don't know, Leonardo AI is an AI-powered content production suite. So the focus is really on helping creatives to augment that creative process, and that's really part of their ethos. So in his role, Jachin not only does operations, but makes decisions around technical capabilities and features as part of that product. And he has a lot of experience in different areas, not limited to operations, but also in AI, in human-centered AI development, and also in championing and building communities around different products and services. So I've given a really brief introduction, but perhaps you can give me a bit more of a story around your journey and how you ended up really being at the helm of Leonardo AI.
Yeah, for sure. First of all, thanks everyone for being here. Really appreciate it. I guess to throw it back to the beginnings, born overseas, born in the Middle East, and emigrated to Australia when I was 4 years old. Grew up in Sydney, in the western suburbs, and always grew up loving games, but grew up in like a frugal household, so it was like a big challenge convincing my parents to like buy me like one game a year. So generally had to be like the flagship, so Call of Duty, GTA, or like free to play. Loved RuneScape growing up. I don't know if anyone else in the room is an old school RuneScape fan. Yeah, I think I spent like more time killing sand crabs in that game than I have on Leonardo. But yeah, grew up loving games, always wanted to get into some sort of space where I could do it for work, but with that sort of immigrant family, I ended up going down the finance path and actually studied like data analytics and finance because that's what I could make money doing. It's interesting how it's led me to this path. I did some machine learning back at uni, and that was around like insurance, detecting fraud in insurance, so not really the same. But then dabbled in image processing, which like really caught my attention. I love like photography and the intersection between tech and creativity. And then yeah, actually moved into like fintech as one of my earlier roles, and was a BA there, and eventually took over as like the product owner of a web app we were developing at the time. Coincidentally, the founder of that project, JJ, they sold the company and later founded a game studio. And then following the game studio, started this AI company, Leonardo AI. And funny story, he approached me at my wedding last year at the reception and knew I was interested in the space and was like, hey man, like, should we start an AI company? I was like, 100%, get me out of fintech, I'm ready to do this. So I tell people that was like the second best thing that happened to me that day. But yeah, it's been a whirlwind. We launched like our MVP Christmas Eve last year, and it's still under a year, and it's honestly pretty surreal to be like sitting here talking to you right now, so super grateful to be here. Yeah.
Thanks. I mean, that change of track into AI/ML, what really precipitated that? How did that interest really develop? Because clearly it's it's not a new space, but there's a lot of new developments happening this year. What actually prompted you to sign up and say yes?
Yeah. So again, I was really interested in the intersection between creativity and technology. And in terms of generative AI, the boom has seemed to happen overnight in the last year. But one of the earlier things I came across was Google Deep Dream, which was released in 2015. And that was a model based on CNNs, or convolutional neural networks. It wasn't really useful for things like production or even concepting. It was like a really cool way to generate some trippy art. You could input images and get interesting results, a lot of eyes a lot of the time. And then going from there, the next sort of iteration was disco diffusion, and this is what really like captured our attention. Around the same time as this, VQGAN plus Clip, which was a model that came out by Catherine Crowson, who's like really well renowned right now in the AI space. That came out, and I was like discovered how to make like videos using AI, and it was a little bit trippy, but way more cohesive than what we saw with Google Deep Dream. And for me, it was like this realization of like, if there's anything that comes close to turning dreams into reality, like this is the tech that's actually going to make that happen. I remember going to my parents and being like check this out. Like I just created like a TikTok video showing you how to like, showing like a trippy video of like Stairway to Heaven or something. And then my mum was like, can't you just Google that? I'm like, no, that's not how it works. Like you don't get it. But yeah, it was that like realization of like, okay, this is going to change everything.
So are your parents on board now?
Oh yeah, now they get it. My dad sends me like YouTube videos now, like covering Leonardo. He's like so proud. But yeah, I think my mum is still like, can't you just Google it? I don't think she fully understands, but she realizes people like the product, so she's proud in that sense. But yeah, and then following Disco Diffusion, Midjourney came out, and that was like unbelievable. Like the cohesion and the composition of the images, the colors it was using, it was just like visually stunning. But it was a closed model, so no one really had access to it. And the real breakthrough was when Stable Diffusion came out, open source. We saw like this huge community build around it, and this was the conception of Leonardo. We realized we could start from this sort of framework and build from there.
Yeah. Oh, thanks. Changing track a little bit slightly. So I know that Leonardo AI, I work with them at AWS, and you're part of the Global Generative AI Accelerator. You are the only one selected in the Asia-Pacific Japan region. Curious to learn a bit more about that experience and how you found it.
Yeah. So for context, we launched this product Christmas Eve last year, and then it was a few months and we started getting some awesome traction, which we were blown away with. And then, that entire time, like most of us are just sitting in our bedrooms, like working on this thing. It's like post-COVID, no one's even seeing the sun. And then suddenly to get accepted into like an accelerator program was surreal. Like flying out to San Francisco for the first time. And it was quite an intimidating experience at first, like all these insane startups. I remember going there and people were like building stuff to detect cancer using AI, and we were like, oh yeah, we can create cool images. But it was really surreal experience being there, and the AWS helped us a lot. And we had like a business mentor and a technical mentor, and us founders, not previously founding anything that grew to this sort of size, was really helpful for like understanding what we need to do in terms of scaling, and especially on the infrastructure requirements. It was a great experience.
Yeah, cool. I mean, you've spoken a bit about like the inception of Leonardo, about how you've grown a little bit, but maybe we can take a step back and understand, like, sure that the tech was in place to support the build, but what else was there around that inception of Leonardo that you can sort of elaborate on a bit further?
Yeah. So, around mid last year, I was telling you at my wedding, like that's when the founder of that previous company reached out to me. But prior to that, he actually founded a game studio called Rainy Studios, and that was they were building a trading card game at the time. It recently launched on Epic, and they're super excited about that. But JJ, the CEO and co-founder of that project, was heading up the production side of things, and was really specific in terms of what he wanted to achieve creatively, like had a clear creative vision but couldn't put it into words, or like it basically involved a lot of like back and forth between artists. So it was through the challenges that he experienced there that we were trying to solve those challenges initially using Gen AI. So in terms of what that looked like, it was high production costs and long development cycles, and what that meant was, in turn, some compromises would need to be made if they weren't able to meet those restrictions, and those compromises would essentially affect, what the intended creative vision was meant to be. So what we came to the realization of was that with generative AI, it was now an opportunity to hit low cost, high speed, and high quality all at the same time. So yeah, that was the initial inception for Leonardo. We realized, targeting professionals in the space, if we wanted to target game studios and game developers, the novelty of interacting with a black box, which is what a lot of the Gen AI options at the time would soon wear off. Like the need for control and customizability would be essentially key to really winning these people over. So we really set out to make sure we build as much control in the process as possible, and that's sort of behind everything we're doing. So as much granular control before and after hitting the generate button is what we were trying to achieve there, and that's what we set out to do.
I mean, it feels like you've had, let's be real, a pretty dream run in terms of a startup. You started last year, you're already sort of part of that generative AI accelerator, you're scaling massively, but there must have been some roadblocks that came up. So whether that's technically or non-technically, can you go into in a bit of depth some of those roadblocks and how you overcame them?
Yeah. So the first one being the initial backlash against generative AI when it first came out. A lot of it because what people were getting access to at the time were black boxes. So in response to that is what we were trying to do in terms of adding control. Beyond that, since we saw the scale just blowing up, I mean, here are some stats which we're really proud to show off. But, when we launched in December, we were targeting game studios and game developers, did a bit of advertising on Twitter and Reddit, got around 30,000 inquiries, 90% of them game developers, game studios. But then people realized the versatility of the platform. You didn't just have to use it to generate game assets. You could essentially generate anything you wanted. And that started this sort of flywheel, and people covering us on YouTube, comparing us to Midjourney, things like that. So we saw an eruption in terms of signups, and at the time our infrastructure wasn't robust enough, so we had to put a wait list in place and had to limit how fast we could grow. So AWS really helped us there in terms of our workload and GPUs, scaling that infrastructure, and then in terms of our front end, Vercel was really instrumental there. They've just had flawless service from the beginning. And then beyond that, I guess the team has been scaling really quickly. So when we launched the MVP, we had about 10 people in December, and we're now at 70 people, which is crazy to think of. None of us have ever managed that many people before, and we didn't go into this project looking forward to managing that many people. I can't say we've figured out how to overcome the challenges there yet. We're still on that journey, but it's an exciting one to be on. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for that. So we've spoken a little bit about, what it is that Leonardo sets out to do, but can you maybe go into it a bit more detail around how Leonardo AI actually augments that toolkit that creatives have? What does that look like in practice?
Yeah. So when we launched, our main feature at the time was model fine-tuning, and what that enabled was game studios to come into the platform that already have their own IP and assets and upload around 10 to 15 images and train their own models or fine-tune their own models on their IP to be able to generate, a bunch of style-consistent but thematically deviated assets. That was the main feature at the time, and then we brought on a bunch of control options, things like control nets and ways to influence your outputs using input images, and then a canvas feature to finesse your work. I guess I can talk through some of these features with some slides. So, in terms of model fine-tuning, the platform has a bunch of models that are there that you can use that are quite general. You can prompt for anything and it'll generate it. But if you really want to hone in on a niche or you have a particular style, this example here is for fantasy helmets. So you could either use a pre-trained model on there, either created by us or the community, or create your own, and then train a model, create a data set, train a model, and then what that'll enable you to do is generate more similar assets, or you could even deviate using like terms like colorful, holographic, tentacles, and we found that it would really retain that style, but you could deviate thematically quite far. And not only for items and objects, but things like style. So Rainy Studios, which was our CEO previously co-founded, they found ways to use Leonardo to train a model on their style of card art, and then be able to output more ideas and concepts based on that. So, from uploading a bunch of these to then getting cards like this, obviously the frames were added afterwards, but really helped speed up their sort of production for those types of things. And then even things like isometric objects and buildings, and for that sort of top-down game style, people found it really useful to build out those sorts of things. And in terms of like what else is capable, like you can essentially prompt for anything. So we've seen people generating environments, and in terms of the canvas tool, this is an example of like a top-down isometric game. Someone trained a model on that style of like isometric chunks, and what you could do is take it onto the canvas, erase the edges, and then in-paint and out-paint to like create an entire environment. I've actually got a video showing like the process of that and how.
I mean, how challenging is it to actually do that model training?
Well, it's super easy, like 10 to 15 images of the style you want. Ideally, they all have that similar style or all have a similar composition. You hit train, and we managed to get training under 5 minutes. So you would have a model that you own, like no one else gets access to it if you don't want them to have access. But it's you train on your IP and you can generate more stuff like that. But this is sort of showing you how quick that process can be done on the canvas. So we generated a couple tiles, chucked them onto the canvas, erased the edges, and then that rainbow box is like the generation window, and as it overlaps on existing areas of a scene, it takes that into context, and it's almost like Photoshop's generative fill. It's like context-aware fill. It's super useful for like quickly building out environments. And in terms of like other ways to use the canvas, this is like a dodgy example I made, but sort of there's other stuff you can do on there. You could create a character, change their weapons, and adjust things that generate weird. Hands is still an issue for a lot of generative models, so you can take it onto the canvas, mask out the hands, and regenerate. Makes like finessing your work a lot easier. I think one of the issues, especially for professionals, was when you're using a black box and you get something that's maybe 80% of the way there, like closing that gap instead of like having to regenerate 100 times. Now you can just take it onto the canvas, touch up the areas you don't like, and really speeds up that process, gives more control back to the creator.
So speaking of creators, a topic we haven't touched on yet, but it's a bit of an elephant in the room, is around AI and jobs. We're hearing a lot of talk about AI taking people's jobs. So it'd be really curious to get your take on that and your perspective.
Yeah, completely understand. Yeah, it is scary, like seeing how much this tech is evolving in the last year and how much new stuff is coming out. We believe, like especially within creative industries like game development, that the human in the loop is like key, really, to get what you want to get achieve. Like, for example, that Viking thing. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing. You can tell it's like not great, but having that understanding of color theory, harmony, composition, I think is really key. So everything that we're trying to build at Leonardo is tools to augment the creator. We don't see any of these being a replacement. At the end of the day, the human in the loop is, I think, key when it comes to really building engaging games. I was previously going down the route of like data analytics and becoming a data analyst, and seeing some of the progression there is a little bit scary. But I think within creative industries, it's a bit of a different story. These tools at the end of the day are there to speed up production, and like a lot of times there's things people don't like to create, like texturing shrubs and rocks in the background, or like the 500th door in a game. It's a bit of a pain. So I think finding ways to weave AI into those sorts of workflows to speed up production there is key. But I don't think we're close to replacing artists anytime soon.
Yeah. I mean, how do you actually see then companies leveraging this sort of AI tech? What sort of workflows are you seeing?
Yeah, so I guess like a major one for model fine-tuning is mobile games that require reskinning. One of the main use cases we've seen is like, training a model on existing assets as part of a mobile game, and then generating a bunch in different styles, making the reskinning process easier. Training a model on objects or like character faces to create, consistent characters in different poses has been really useful for some studios. I think the main one is like a lot of studios are currently using this for concepting mainly, and for people like JJ, our co-founder, who's like really specific with the vision but can't like realize that it's made that process of like an idea to a concept super simple, like the 0 to 1. So for art directors to be able to quickly generate something that's not 100% there but captures their vision and idea, and then handing that off to designers, I think has been one of the most useful use cases of Leonardo at the moment. Another one is like for artists, like being able to create sketches and then turn them into a sort of like finished piece has been made really easy now, and you can really use like terrible sketches even like way simpler than this, and just based on the way you prompt it and sketch onto the canvas, you can get some really cool results. Yeah.
So if I'm a developer at a game studio, how might I actually use something like this in my workflow?
Yeah, so it's an evolving space. Like currently we see fine-tuning being really useful for like, keeping style consistent, for riffing off ideas with the AI, like just to quickly sort of gauge whether, your ideas have what it takes to be part of a game. We've seen a lot of developers using it in that way. For things like 3D texturing, we've built some functionality there where you can take an untextured 3D object. If it has a decent UV map, it's pretty good, and you can like enter a text prompt and generate a whole 3D texture that gets mapped to the model. I think this is a better example. So these are some examples of like texturing guns and some characters, but it's not at like AAA or even AA quality yet. But for things like rocks and shrubs and things in the background, we've found a lot of developers find this super useful for that sort of thing. I've got an example of like a game that was quickly whipped up using Leo to generate textures for all the assets. Yeah, so this was this was using Leo purely for texturing. It's pretty good. The colors look great, but up close, the fidelity is not there. But yeah, for a lot of the background items and stuff, it's been quite useful. Beyond that, we've seen a lot of studios use it for things like character turnaround sheets, just to give handover to 3D modelers to work off, and a few of the features like generating characters in consistent poses, using things like control nets have been really useful. I guess it's interesting to see all the sorts of use cases that people are finding. Like, while we've built this tool and it was initially for game developers and we know some ways to use it, every day we see people coming up with new use cases, which is quite interesting. It's sort of gone beyond us a little bit.
I guess, what's been the most unexpected use case where you thought, wow, we never thought our product would be used in that way?
Yeah, I mean, we had one recently, not really game dev related, but a Swedish wood manufacturer reached out and they wanted to do a marketing campaign where you take a photo of a concrete building and then turn it into a building made of wood, and it was promoting sustainable building practices. And we were mind blown. We were we'd never even thought of this as being a use case of this tech, but it makes so much sense. If you're familiar with image to image in generative AI, you can upload an image and control the strength and tweak it using AI, and that's essentially just a workflow that uses image to image, takes an image of a concrete building, adds some noise and then turns it into wood. Really interesting to see stuff like that. So I guess as time passes, we're noticing that there are current workflows in game development, and people are finding ways to bring AI into those workflows. But I think it's interesting to see how some game studios and developers are now realizing that AI has a potential to alter and change some of these as well. So I think soon we'll start seeing a potential shift in how these workflows actually operate, rather than trying to smash AI into an existing one, rather creating new ways to use it.
More and more creative ways that people are using this sort of tech. One thing we've kind of briefly touched on, but I think is often something I talk about with customers, and I imagine it comes up for you as well, and that's data. So we touched on training, and so you can use your IP and actually train a model. What happens with that data that you're gathering?
Yep, really fair. So anything you upload to the platform, any images you upload for model training, any models that you create or train, everything is yours. You own all of that IP. We never use it for training new models or reinforcement learning or anything like that. From the get-go, we realized that's just problematic. We don't need to deal with that. That's not what people want. It doesn't make any sense. So, as a user, if you're coming in bringing your own IP, you can trust that none of it will be used for training or anything like that. Key thing to note though, if you're keen to try Leo as a free user, anything you generate will be public. So as a paid user, you have the option to keep that private. But if you're interested in trying it out, feel free to reach out and we can organize a sort of trial for you to test out some of the better features while keeping your stuff private.
The other part to my question as well was that you're generating all of this content yourselves as well. So is there any further use case that you see for this, or how are you even managing that amount of data that's being generated by users?
It's a lot of data. Even as an individual user using Gen AI, I think you quickly realize how far down the rabbit hole you can get, and you end up with so many different images, and your hard drives are filling up. I guess asset management is really key to us. So we're going to be building in features where you can manage your assets better and put them into folders and things like that. But then, in terms of our use for the data, there's opportunities for reinforcement learning, not necessarily from using all of the images generated on the platform, but rather getting user feedback for was the image close to what you prompted for, or did you like the aesthetic look of it? And using that sort of information, there's a lot we can take from that. But for now, we haven't done any reinforcement learning like that. Most of our improvement has been from getting feedback from people using the platform.
Yeah, I mean, it feels like that's pretty central to your whole business model, actually having a community that provides a lot of feedback around what they're doing, what they want to see, how they're using your product. Like, how have you gone about actually building up this community? Like, it's they seem pretty engaged.
Yeah. So, we managed to build a Discord community of over 1.7 million users, making us the third largest server, which is wild to even say out loud. But at the time when we started putting together the community, there was a lot of backlash around generative AI at the time, especially people were like stealing, like using artists' names in their prompts and like trying to generate stuff that resembled their art. And that's stuff like we don't think is right. The models are capable of doing that sort of thing, but we don't sort of support that. But at the time we realized there was a need for like a community of people that were interested in this tech. Like we knew it was going to evolve. At the time, it wasn't really, appealing to everyone. So we started putting together this Discord community, and image generation isn't even in our Discord. Like we don't offer it as a service there. We wanted the server to be purely a community. So we started building that out and funneling people through there, and quickly saw like a really vibrant community get engaged in the tech and really get behind it. It was interesting because I think even for me, like discovering this tech was sort of like having a superpower early on. Like, I can type in anything and just just realize what I'm thinking, right? And then the better you got at it, it just you feel like you have an edge on and everyone else that doesn't know how to use it. And I related it to myself being a musician. I play the drums. My wife and I will be like driving down the street, and she's like playing Taylor Swift, and she's like, "Oh, do you think you could play this on drums?" And I'm like, "Of course!" Like it's a challenge to me. Like, of course I can play this. And that same sort of mentality permeated through the community. Like when people realized what they can do with the tooling and like how to get better at prompting, what settings to use. Any challenge we threw at them, or even just like community challenges, people really got behind that. And when people had questions or were wondering like, how do I do this? How do I do that? It was interesting to see like how many people actually stepped up and wanted to help. So it's cool to see that. I think it's a product of like, AI sort of democratizing access to creativity, and so many people being able to access something so powerful. And that's just continued to build. So we're across Discord and Facebook, interestingly enough, is like popping up right now. Completely different demographic to Discord, but people are posting their images in there and like, how do I do this? How do I like fix this guy's hands or like extend their legs? Things like that. So it's funny to see a lot of people are upskilling themselves, creating like training content, and it's like, it's turning out to be like a whole new skill now, people learning to use these tools, which is awesome.
I mean, where do you really see this all going, say, the next 5 years, this intersection between AI, between, game tech, like, where are we headed?
I was saying to you earlier, like, I can't even predict the next 5 weeks, let alone the next 5 years. But I think what I'm excited for in terms of games is, games that integrate AI, not only like generative images, but like LLMs and things like that for like dynamic games that live while you're not playing them anymore. I remember like RuneScape, like you'd play this thing, log off, come back, and the entire economy's crashed or something, and it's like all this stuff has happened while you're not there. And I like that feeling. I can imagine, some of these single-player storyline games can become like that, really engaging, or just characters having a life of their own without you even being involved, or like you come back and like a war has broken out and it's like, what do I do now, right? Really dynamic storylines. I think the opportunity for UGC is huge. Right now, it's a little bit of a grey area, with the stuff that happened with Steam. I'm sure you heard like some games got taken down because they used ChatGPT as a plugin. And I think right now, the opportunity for some of this tech to be able to generate anything is a little bit problematic. So it'll require some time to really mature and evolve. But the opportunity there for UGC is massive. Like, imagine jumping in a game and like being able to create your own skin for a gun, or like a character, or art for your wall in your house. Like, really, really cool opportunities there. I think that's what I'm most excited for. Yeah.
So if you can't speak to like 5 years, which seems fair enough, considering the year that you guys have had as well, what really is next then, like in the next year or so for Leonardo?
Yeah, for us, we really want to continue going down the path of adding as much control as possible. We see a lot of value in bringing like team and collaborative features. So we're looking to bring in team plans, like collaborative tooling for the canvas, so multiple people can work in there, sort of like a Figma type situation. And then better asset management for teams to collaborate. That's what a lot of people have been requesting at the moment. And then we're also keen to really dive in on the enterprise side. So we've built out a team of business development, a BD team, and we're constantly having conversations with game studios, developers, really trying to understand what they want to see out of Gen AI, what's most useful for them, and really being intentional with how we build out the platform. I think that's sort of the direction we're going in. More control and bringing in more collaboration.
Yeah, so really focusing in on that experience as well that creatives are having on your platform.
Yeah. Like we have an in-house ML team, and they have so many ideas, but trying to build a UI UX for that sort of thing gets complicated real quick. So trying to be really intentional with like, how do we make this not overwhelming but still extremely useful for developers and studios is pretty key to the next few months, I think. Because right now we're at a stage where, you go to generate an image and there is quite a lot to digest. So there is some work that we're doing for like training and upskilling and like resources for like how to use these tools best. Yeah,
cool. Well, those are most of my questions. So we were going to open up to the floor as well, if anyone has a question. All right, you definitely put your hand up first.
I'll run the mic to you real quick.
Oh, I can
Thank you.
I can do that. Thank you.
I was really surprised to hear it was only 10 to 15 images for the data set. I always envision, thousands, and that's why they're hiring, I know ChatGPT, and they'll use workers in Africa even to like train the data. I was just curious, do you see diminishing returns with larger data sets, like, or is it better off, like, should I use 1,000 images or millions to train, and why just 10, 15?
Yeah, great question. So in terms of model training on our platform, it's fine-tuning on top of a foundational model. So when you talk about the foundational models, these are the ones that need like billions of images to really be, have that context and understanding of like the world. But when you fine-tune, it's more on the ML side of like, you can tweak a bunch of parameters to weight like those 10 to 15 images a lot more highly, so you can really push it in a certain direction. But you can get better results from using larger data sets, but again, that sort of training pipeline needs to be adjusted to account for it. So for our platform, when we initially released training as a service, 10 to 15 images made the most sense for like simple use cases like objects, styles, and characters, but we're going to be looking into offering more advanced training options later on, including things like being able to caption individual images and things like that. I don't know if you're familiar with LoRAs, but they're sort of like smaller models that can be trained even quicker than under 2 minutes, and they can be stacked on top of each other and on top of other models, and that's sort of opening up a whole new world of opportunities where you can train these like small LoRAs on like a character, environment, style, stack them, and then have your character in a particular environment in a particular style. Like there's a lot of opportunities for stuff like that. I think that's where it seems frightening, the concept of like training a model for your studio or whatever, because we're accustomed to think we need this huge amount of data, but for really niche specific use cases, fine tuning is super effective for that sort of thing. Yeah.
I think you might have. Thanks, Sophie.
Thank you. So my question is, what advice would you recommend for developers looking to train their own machine learning models from scratch? And how would they source their databases and make sure everything's above board, like legally?
Yeah. So like a foundational model? Okay. It's a lot of data that you need. The ML expertise is quite heavy as well. Like our team is currently looking into foundational model training now, and it's not an easy thing to do by any means. In terms of like getting an ethical data set right now, that's really difficult too. Like for transparency, like the underlying foundational models that we use are open source, like Stable Diffusion XL. They've built in like opt-out options for artists and things like that, but there's no truly ethical foundational model out there right now. It's an evolving space, and I think we'll get there quite soon. We're working on that, and I think the open source community will have something coming out. But for yourself as a studio training a foundational model, sourcing that data I think is the hardest part, and then having the data be high quality with really good captions is really key to have a good training run. It's a question we often ask ourselves, like, are the big foundational model players, are they going to win, or is it like the small third-party companies, training their own foundational models, are they going to win? And it's a tough one, but I think eventually it's going to get to a stage where fine-tuning makes the most sense. Like, it's really resource intensive, and if there's a particular outcome you're trying to achieve, I think looking for alternatives before foundational training is probably a good idea. But if you really want to go down that route, you need a lot of expertise in that field.
Yeah, I mean, from the AWS perspective as well, I work with a lot of customers exploring AI/ML. We're seeing this is the only customer I've had looking into foundational models. It's a big expense to invest in, so unless there's real value in it for a business, most will go the route of tuning the models or augmenting them in some way to provide it with additional context. Foundational models is really sort of that next level if it's required. So I think very much seconding what you were saying.
Yeah, and to add to that, if you look at like raw outputs from a foundational model, they're so bad, like really trash. It was like a lot of work on top of that from our ML team to get images that are looking, like this. A lot of GPUs. Yeah. So, I mean, if you're going down that route, I'm sure AWS would be happy to help.
Yeah. Cool. I think the gentleman just here had a question.
I run a visual effects studio up in Sydney. We use AI pretty much in every department since the last year. I guess the few things where we come to a stop is things like TPN security. So if we obviously can't be using cloud for developing data sets and all this sort of stuff, and models and things that we use and things like that we have to keep in-house. So is TPN security something that you're looking into in terms of being able to do that? And also just to touch upon the resolution of some of the texturing and things that you can do. Obviously there's a limit with all of this AI at the moment, and I guess using things like Photoshop Enhance and things like that come in use, but they don't go all the way. Is something like taking your textures and then having another application by you to AI enhance and pump it up to like 4K or 8K textures something that's in your pipeline?
So to address the security side of things, yeah, a lot of larger studios especially have been asking for that sort of thing. There's always, you know, different requirements that they need to meet. So things like private cloud offering is definitely on the roadmap, and that's something we eventually want to offer. Yeah, so that's for sure. I think it's essential if we want to be helping these larger studios especially. In terms of, tooling for things like upscaling, like as separate apps, that's a really good point you bring up, and that adds to like the fact that actually stuff like that is doable, and our ML team has actually created tools like that. It's just a matter of our current UI being limited. Like it would hurt our UX at the moment to like throw those features in. So we are actually working on another feature, which I won't talk too much about, but essentially verticalized use cases and particular workflows for certain outcomes. There will be a place for those sorts of tools, and we'll enable that, yeah, for sure.
I think we've got time for one more question. But there's someone else at the back as well.
Thanks. I work in galleries, and I wondered if we care a lot about sustainability, and I wondered, like, if you knew about the carbon footprint of Leonardo, if there's any way to be able to reduce that in experiential settings.
Yeah. Currently, in terms of like carbon accounting, we haven't, like, for transparency, we haven't gone down the route of like really calculating every aspect of that. But we know there's like, we have a responsibility there, and that's part of like what we want to make sure that we're offsetting whatever carbon footprint that we do have. I think we're coming up to a stage now where the team is at a size that we can really allocate a substantial amount of resources to solving that problem. But till now, we've been in like build mode and just going, just shipping features constantly to try and keep up with the speed and pace of the field. But we definitely see it as an issue that we need to make sure we're looking out for sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, AWS as well, where a lot of Leonardo is hosted, does a lot of work in that space in terms of offsetting and investment in renewable energy. It does depend on the region of the globe you're in as to what sorts of investments are happening. So if the services you're using are hosted on AWS, there's always ways to look into that as well. So I think we're probably at time, 3:47. We were just going to wrap up by saying thank you all for joining us today. I think we had one last slide.
Yep.
So if you want to know more about either AWS Games or Leonardo AI and how we can help you in your game development, please reach out to us.
Sweet. Thanks, everyone.